Welcome to the SmartTechCheck Podcast, hosted by Mark Vina, your home for candid, insightful, and provocative conversations about the smart home automation, security, smartphones, PC and console gaming, and much more.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Vina, host of the SmartTechCheck Podcast. Today is Friday, May 19th, 2023. Joining me for today's podcast are John Quain, who writes for the New York Times, Smart Cities, and Tom's Guide. Stuart Walpin, who's been on the field at Yankee Stadium. I did not know about that when we were chatting offline. Who writes for Popular Mechanics, AARP, Techlicious, Investopedia, and other fine publications. And Rob Pecoraro, who writes about technology developments at PC Mag, Fast Company, and other publications. Folks, how are you all today on this fine Friday?
Good, very good.
Oh, okay, good.
Oh, that's good.
I'd like to know, I've been on the field at RFK Stadium and Nationals Park, so I got that going for me, which is nice.
Do you really want to tell people that? Do you really want
I mean, RFK, you know, who knows what kind of contamination was in the grass, but it was still cool. You know,
when I think of RFK, I think I have images in my mind about Joe Theismann getting his leg broken at that famous Monday night game.
Right.
I'll never forget that.
LT.
Yeah.
You know what?
Festival
You know what's crazy?
concert.
I can't imagine. Can you imagine that Monday night game being broadcast today in high definition 4K? I mean, ABC got a lot of flack, if you recall, for playing it over and over again, and you kind of see the bone sticking out of the leg.
The
I
agony of
can
the
imagine today what the image was that would get generated.
I actually have a football signed by Joe on the shelf back there. He was a guest at some event Earthlink hosted at Internet World in New York in like 1998.
Did you still have a dial-up modem in a box someplace in the back?
I have a Caroline phone on the bookshelf back there, in fact.
Yeah, he's actually a very nice guy, even though he's like a mortal enemy of my favorite team. But I spent like an evening with him just chatting, and he was like a nice guy. And I'm like, oh, well, all these years I didn't like you.
Yeah, we should do a podcast, famous people we know or we've kind of bumped into. That would be an interesting podcast. I'd love to see someone. Actually, Stuart, you've probably met a lot of
brush with history. Yeah, I mean, I've met a lot of geniuses because I write the bios for the Consumer Technology Hall of Fame. So it's not only met them, but I've interviewed them. So, you know, my favorite is Ray Dolby. I interviewed him ostensibly because most people don't know this. They know him for noise canceling, but they don't know that he's the co-holder of all the original videotape recording patents. And so I was doing a history of the history of videotape, and Dolby granted me 30 minutes with him, and nobody had ever asked him about this before. So I got him on the phone for an hour and a half talking about something that nobody had ever really asked him about before. So that was lots of fun.
You know, it's fascinating, and I think, and we got to get into the podcast, is when you meet someone famous and you're talking to them privately, and their on-screen persona is different from their one-on-one persona. And that doesn't happen to everyone, but I've had some interesting experiences with mostly in the technology field of people saying, boy, this person's completely unlike what they're really like when the camera is on. You know, Rob is like that, by the way. If you know Rob, you know, you'd say you never want to hang out with Rob because he's just so obnoxious and
snarky.
That's a good word. That's a good word. All right, let's get the ball rolling here. Let us talk about this is going to be a fun topic. The Supreme Court had some rulings with Twitter that held for Twitter and Facebook and Google earlier in the week. I know we're going to have some spirit opinions. I'm going to start with Rob because actually he actually did read the ruling. I haven't read the ruling. I've read probably 8 or 9 articles on it, including this morning's Wall Street Journal report on it. So that tends to always be interesting when a major publication weighs in on an issue. But Rob, let's get your perspective first, and then we'll go to John.
So it's been interesting both to read the ruling and to read the coverage of it. So the case itself here is about a mass murder committed by a zealot for the ISIS terrorist death cult in Istanbul, Turkey, New Year's Eve 2019, I think. And could you say that social platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Google, were in some way aiding and abetting the commission of this crime because they did not kick ISIS off their platforms? when they, I guess, first knew about it. And in some cases, their automated recommendation, and in the case of YouTube, revenue sharing systems provided some assistance to said terrorist death cult. And so in this Supreme Court opinion, unanimous, written by Justice Clarence Thomas, they essentially say that there is no case here. It's interesting because it's being depicted as all about Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act,
Right.
which is the law that says social platforms cannot be held responsible for what their users post. The users are held responsible for that, even if they actively, aggressively moderate content. The ruling doesn't mention CDA 230 at all. Instead, Justice Thomas writes that under any reasonable definition of aiding and abetting, you can't say that lax moderation or systems running automatically meant that Twitter, Facebook, and Google were in league with ISIS or trying to make anything happen. There's a line in the ruling where, yes, there are no allegations that defendants treated ISIS any differently than from anyone else. Rather, defendants' relationship with ISIS and its supporters appears to have been the same as their relationship with their billion-plus other users, arm's length, passive, and largely indifferent. So it's not like Justice Thomas is saying, these companies are great. Bang up job. Well done. But under this law that was brought up, the Justice for the initial abbreviation for it is JASTA, 2016 statute saying that you can bring a civil lawsuit against companies if you're a victim of a recognized government-defined terrorist group if they aided and abetted the commission of a terrorist act. This case doesn't meet that standard. So there's nothing here. The case shouldn't have been brought. And so the court held unanimously that, yes, Twitter is off the hook, Google is off the hook, and CDA 230 never entered the discussion. So it's a case where if that law had never been passed, you would have the exact same ruling.
So my question for John, and let's congratulate John because he just passed the bar and he's not going to be, going to be presenting to the Supreme Court at some point in the future. That's just a joke.
In case this journalism thing doesn't work out, good to have a fallback plan.
That's a fallback plan. But the interesting thing to me, it was a 9-0 ruling, if I'm not mistaken. And with this Supreme Court, the composition of this Supreme Court, when something's 9-0, that kind of grabs my attention. Even before you read the to me, which is a very matter-of-fact statement of what the facts were and the way they applied the law. And I think it is interesting that 230 was not invoked. But anyway, there's always two sides to every coin. John, your thoughts?
Well, I'm gonna pull a Stuart here. What I want to point out is how ignorant the Supreme Court justices are of how this technology works. So that citation that Rob just picked out about it being passive is, of course, completely false and erroneous and has almost never been true. Maybe with Archie and Gopher, that might have been true, but it hasn't been true with any of those services, right? They are actively every minute being tweaked. Google's search engine itself, several hundred times a day, that algorithm is tweaked. And it's intentionally tweaked. It's not accidentally tweaked or passively tweaked. It's tweaked to do very specific things. And we know that, I'll read you some of Justice Thomas's misunderstanding of this. Once the platform and sorting tool algorithms were up and running, defendants, that's Facebook, Google, and Twitter, at most allegedly stood back and watched.
Yes.
They are not alleged to have taken any further action with respect to ISIS. Well, that's just false, right? That's just on its face, absolutely false, because we know that they judge those algorithms and see the traffic that's happening in real time and tweak them in real time. So they're seeing how much traffic they're getting from these. It's just like having Donald Trump on your service, right? Look, it's just too much money. Could they shut it down in a minute?
I don't think ISIS is a traffic magnet has ever been.
It absolutely is. In these places, we're all looking at these videos. You should see the numbers. They're huge when they put those videos up. So they knew exactly what they were doing. And this idea that it was passive, that's just ridiculous. Now, to Rob's point, and to Justice Thomas goes on and on about this aiding and abetting is really vague. And there's like maybe 2 pages of, We don't know what it means, but that's kind of the Supreme Court's job, right? They put this in the law. Is this aiding and abetting? So they establish by precedent or whatnot, whether it is or not. They set the bar really high. His claim is it's got to be this specific act, not general spying or general terrorism. It's got to be this very specific act. I don't know, in any espionage case, whether you could even cite this. The kid who's in jail right now and trying to get out of jail on bail, which he probably shouldn't. There's no specific act that would be tied to, right? If he sent it through Discord to one of these foreign governments. And so they set the bar really high. I think they just bailed on this. It was 38 pages of, we don't want to have anything to do with this. Right? It was unanimous. And I think for different reasons, they didn't want to have anything to do with it, on each of their parts. But Stuart's going to say, look, they don't understand the technology. They clearly don't.
Well, so Stuart, you've heard from Justice Peguero and Justice Quain here on the call. How do you weigh in?
Well, I have a couple of thoughts. The first thought is that given that the Supreme Court admitted they didn't know what the hell they were talking about, they're the last people I want making law on this. And not that I think Congress is in a better position to make law, but all the laws that they're citing are old. Section 230 is from 1996. There was no such thing as any of these The Well, I think, was the biggest social media platform in 1996. There simply wasn't. Section 230 simply was not written to address any of the issues that we have now. And so the law concerning people, I always go back to things that you post on a bulletin board at a supermarket. Who has responsibility over what's posted there? Can a criminal go up there and post something on a bulletin board on a supermarket, and the supermarket, for instance, if you go into a supermarket and you post that said, I would like to have this person killed, I'll give you $5,000 for doing it. If the crime is committed, is the supermarket responsible for that?
Yeah,
I'm not a lawyer, but I certainly don't want the Supreme Court deciding that. I want legislators and lawmakers deciding that. And so the problem here isn't that whether or not the Supreme Court made a right decision or a wrong decision. The problem is that the Congress has made no decision in almost 30 years concerning a topic that is just going to get worse, not better.
Right. No, and I can't disagree with that element of the argument. I think, once, and we're not going to talk about AI this week because my head will explode. But the reality is that the important area where the government has to act is AI. And, the only thing I'll say is that I'm frightened of the kind of video content that's going to appear over the next 6 months or 9 months as we run up to the election on both sides. This is not a political discussion. There's going to be crazy stuff out here that it'll be a lot of great fodder for podcasts. So maybe I should be happy in that regard. But I think, the government just has a history of being behind the 8 ball every time when something happens from a technology standpoint, not just the internet, but there's many, many examples you can cite over the last 100 years that they're just a very reactive organization. If I could call the Congress an organization, but it's scary. So anyway,
the other thing about this is not only are they late, they can't project anywhere beyond where they are. The Telecommunications Act of 1996 doesn't mention the internet.
Yes.
The Section 230 is an add-on.
No, that's ironic. That is ironic. Well, anyway, let's get to the next topic because I'm sure we're going to be talking about this again in the not too distant future. This will be a fun topic to talk about as well. Stuart, I'll let you kick this off, but this whole notion around data privacy and security in the connected home category that I follow very closely. Parks Associates, a venerable research firm that I've done some work for. They did a terrific white paper. I was at a chance to glance at it, and I know that you've read it, Stuart. Mm-hmm. But the only thing I'll say about this up front is that what's shocking to me as people get more excited about the smart home, the average home now has 15, 20, 25 connected devices in their home. People are so excited about getting things connected that their excitement, and there's various levels of that, by the way, won't get into that. But the notion of connecting your devices in your smart home, whether it's your smart appliance, which are increasingly becoming more popular, lighting, your home security system with connected cameras, that people are so excited about that, they really think that the security aspect and data privacy elements are not as important. And there's all kinds of goofy things people can do when they hack your home network and they can get into your home. But as a setup, give me your perspective, Stuart, and how you come at this.
Well, I mean, online privacy has been an issue ever since the Snowden leaks a decade ago, and the industry has been coping with this with all the massive data leaks and where all this is coming from. But this study specifically studied the whole smart home issue and how concerned consumers were about their data security and privacy when they connect a device. Now, you mentioned the study found that that internet homes own 16.1 connected devices, and the biggest growing sector of that is video cameras, security cameras, both doorbell cams and indoor cameras.
Right.
But even though people are buying these, and I think the figure was that 30 million homes now have video cameras, almost 3/4 of the people surveyed had had major concerns about privacy in terms of what the companies are doing with the data they're collected, how it's collected, who they're sharing it with, all the worries that the European law, and I'm dyslexic, so GDPR, I think
European stuff.
that the U.S. is talking about, U.S. lawmakers have failed to follow through on, leaving it to the industry to sort of and individual companies try to reassure their consumers. The most interesting couple of tidbits that I found really interesting in there is that nearly half of the people surveyed in internet connected homes had suffered identity theft, which is an astoundingly high number. And I find that completely credible because I suffered it in 2021, and I'm about as careful and as knowledgeable about this as it comes. And even I somehow got hacked into. The other thing I found interesting was that the number of health related devices grew in 2021 and shrunk in 2022, which indicates to me that people are even more concerned about their health data being hacked. And so instead of that area growing, which everybody on this panel would have expected, we want home health, monitoring and that sort of thing. Apparently the industry is not growing, and they didn't make a 1-to-1 correlation, but the fact that almost 3/4 of the people are afraid their data being hacked has certainly got to be a big piece of that.
Sure. And Rob, the interesting point that Stuart made with this explosive growth with security cameras specifically, I believe I would never put a indoor security camera in my home. Now, I have a condo. I don't have a property outside. I don't have a backyard or anything like that. It would be nice to have outdoor security cameras. I don't need it, but I just don't trust any company with my video material. I mean, I have a smart doorbell. I have a Ring, and they claim that the content's encrypted. I have their cloud service, but it only takes one breach, and all of a sudden you're like, what the heck? Now, I don't really worry about it too much because it's out. It faces my common hallway, so it's not a big issue with me. It's the very reason why I wouldn't put a webcam inside my home, because God knows what would happen if that got compromised. A lot of these security camera companies have dubious backgrounds. When I say dubious backgrounds,
you're making me nervous already.
Yeah, thank you. And I know you have a privacy shutter on everything in your house, but let's talk about that in a little bit more detail, because I think that is a big issue that people just don't have an appreciation for. Just because a company says, "Oh, we encrypt your content, and we care about your privacy," there's lots of examples of how sometimes that falls through.
Yeah. The useful phrase to think about here is attack surface. When you add this connected device, how much more does it give a potential attacker to play with? What data can they get access to? And obviously, if it's a camera that's always on, there are various unpleasant possibilities. And certainly if it's indoors, connected baby monitors, we did not have. I mean, they weren't really quite invented, 12 years ago, but we're not remotely tempted to buy any of the ones out there. Also, it's a small house. Kids crying.
Especially the baby cams, the default password is password.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I know that there are efforts to, like the Matter smart home standard, of which we talked about much on this podcast, is supposed to have various
baseline security levels. Yeah,
encryption, passwords, things that must be done to get this standard. The government is working on a sort of label that would also get that across as well. But yeah, a lot of it is, it can be tempting to put this connected device here or that. And I have been very much a late adopter. We have a total of 4 connected light bulbs. And yeah, that's it. I should probably look at replacing some of these thermostats, but we got plenty of other house projects to do first.
Well, it just takes one breach and then really bad things happen. And as you know, the consequences for the company that has the breach generally is like bad company. Don't do that again.
Right. Yeah. If you're really unlucky, the Federal Trade Commission will take an interest. They'll subject you to 20 years of monitoring, and you will have some fine. But the fines it can levy are not necessarily that much. The FTC did sock Facebook to the tune of $5 billion, but Facebook could more than afford to cover that.
Yes. John, your thoughts?
Unfortunately, I have. I don't even want to tell you how many devices I have hanging off the network. Because it's my job, and I just tested. Yeah. I just tested 9 different home security cameras, and I added them to the array of cameras that I already have in different places. And I ran out of places to point them. I started pointing them at the street in New York because I just had no place else to look. So I'm definitely sensitive to the issue of somebody hacking into them and any of the other devices. And that, it has been historically, there was at least 2 companies whose chips were being used commonly in a lot of these very inexpensive cameras, and they were hacked into. So that gave access to hundreds of thousands of cameras suddenly. So there have been incidents like that. But it's a trade-off of security for the home, people, porch pirates and things like that versus, somebody hacking into your video. So I think people have, the meter has gone the other way, and it's gone to, too much theft going on. And they're more worried about that than anything else. And so they're not as concerned about cameras. One interesting thing that I did test was Roku, which is obviously, the people responsible for streaming video in the home basically made Netflix what it is today. They are now pushing to get into the smart home arena. Yes. And they have a series of cameras that are actually, and devices made by somebody else, and I won't say who it is, but and what their pitch is, of course, is that it's a channel on your Roku home screen, right? So I've got cameras now that I just go in and it's like another channel, and I can just take a look at all the cameras that are on it. It's great. It's really convenient. But that made people so nervous a few years ago. If you remember, TV manufacturers used to put cameras in their TVs and they took them out.
Right.
It freaked people out. It was like, I know I could do Skype this way, but I'm not really comfortable. So they took the cameras out. Well, this is sort of in effect putting it back in. And I wonder if now attitudes have changed enough that people will accept it, or will they think that that's a little kind of creepy too? And
Roku example you point out is interesting because Roku, the living room is the central place where people huddle in the most families huddle. And when you think about it, and that's generally, by the way, where the largest screen in the home is. Not to say that people don't have large flat panels in their bedrooms, but for the most part, your biggest TV is going to be in the living room. And there are a number of security companies that have kind of glommed on top of that, saying it's a great kind of a central security location to view multiple cameras. Right. The question really is from a Roku perspective, and they champion privacy and security. I probably no less voraciously than other companies, but when you start comprehending home security into your value proposition, the privacy takes a whole, becomes exponentially more important. And you have to believe there better be some really profound mechanisms integrated in their offering, regardless of and they're not, as you know, they're not building their cameras, or they're partnering with somebody else on their camera solutions. Will customers somehow push back? Roku, entertainment, video, that's one thing. Do I really want to trust, the privacy in my home to a company that's really an entertainment company? So I don't know how that translates. I understand the marketing strategy that Roku is pursuing, but I just wonder if there's some pushback in the minds of consumers.
Well, it's funny that you should mention it, because I was speaking to the Roku had an event a couple of weeks ago, or last week, whenever it was, and I asked the Roku representative about that very topic. Brand identification and reliability. And what he kept telling me is that the way that they're going to push this brand is that they're going to be cheaper than everybody. And I said, that doesn't make me feel any better. That make me feel worse, considering some of the security issues. That I don't want to buy something cheap for security. That's the last place I want to skimp and save.
See, it's interesting you just said that, because the better answer might have been you were going to be actually a little bit more expensive, but we're going to have the best security.
Right, exactly right.
So I'm looking at Roku's site. Like, the first thing I want to know is, what's your vulnerability disclosure policy? If I come to them with a bug report of a security flaw, what is the process through which I submit it? How do I know you're not going to sue me for embarrassing you? If you don't have some kind of VDP out there, you're not serious about security. Right. And so the fact that, and for that matter, I'd want to know, do you have somebody red teaming each new release? What's your, do you pay bug bounties? And their site, it's not reassuring me as a potential customer of this theoretical TV that I could plug into a Roku branded security camera.
Right. And they're going to, they just started rolling this out. We'll see. The only security that for me is a physical shutter. And of all the cameras I tested and systems I tested, the only one was Arlo's camera that had a physical shutter on it.
Right.
And and that's new for them. That not all their cameras do it, but they should all do it. That's the only way I can actually block it out, which is why people have tape all over their computers and stuff, because, I think Lenovo, is that the only one that has a physical shutter on the camera? It's
HP laptops have this one.
A lot of companies are doing that on their PC displays and monitors. They have a privacy shutter built in. Right. But let's get to the next topic, because I want to make sure we hit this one. This is going to be an interesting one. Hyundai and which I have it misspelled. Shame on me. Hyundai and Kia agreed to a $200 million settlement over rampant car thefts. Essentially, the assertion was that their cars don't have the technology that other brands have that would mitigate car theft, and so they agreed to a $200 million settlement. I think there was a software upgrade. It's always software upgrades will help solve the problem. Kind of surprising that they didn't know that before, but the controversial question I want to ask is that, with the crime that's occurring in many of the major cities across the country, because this case has been cited by a lot of local cities saying, hey, you know what? It's not because we have a crime problem in Philadelphia or a crime problem in Boston, but it's because the car manufacturers on these particular two brands had bad capabilities. And it's kind of like throwing the responsibility off the locality and onto the car manufacturers. So I get the settlement piece, but I wonder if there's some dodging going on. So, Stuart, what's your thoughts on it? You think I'm crazy, or you think that?
The problem with getting my opinion on this is that I haven't owned a car in 40 years. And the last time I actually drove one was April, and the time before that, I have no memory of when I drove one. But having read up on this just a little bit in preparation for this, listen, when I rent a car, I'm always nervous about how is this keeping anybody else from taking this car away? And I'm always making sure that I park it when I go into something that I can see it while whatever it is I'm doing, because I have no idea how this car is actually secure. And reading on this, apparently Kia and Hyundai both knew. This is going back about 6 or 7 years, apparently. And this all came out of a TikTok challenge.
Yes.
And somebody on TikTok said, "Oh, we know how you can steal
a car
or a Kia. Here's a YouTube video, and here's how to do it." And it's like apparently what they were lacking was something called, and John can correct me on this, an immobilization technology that somehow keeps a car from getting stolen. I don't know how it works, but on a broader scale, the fact that they knew that this was a problem, which is what the basis of this suit was. It wasn't that they didn't know about it. They knew about it. They just didn't act upon it. They didn't actively jump, going back to the first topic on the Twitter and Google. They knew this was a problem and just didn't do anything about it.
Right.
And so this is a big issue in technology in general, with AI or with social media, is that companies know the danger and don't act upon it because it will cost them money to do so, even if it costs them money later in some sort of fines, because the $200 million is probably less than they would have had to have spent in actually implementing the technology to begin with. So this is just this sort of issue, the Google issue, AI going to Congress and going, "Oh, please regulate us." This is just a rampant problem of companies not wanting to take responsibility for doing, I guess, the right thing.
Well, yeah.
John, you're our resident car expert.
Right. So I did report on this a couple of months ago, and I wrote about it because I was doing stories about how you can hack into cars and just explain to people how you can break into cars. And you can break into all these other cars too. This is not an unusual thing in a way, but this was the old-fashioned way to steal a car. That's all this was about, right? and all the news reports failed to mention, I don't think a single, and even the outlets we write for, I don't think any of them mentioned, "Oh, by the way, you have to smash a window and physically break into the car to steal the car." I mean, this wasn't that TikTok. And, so you had to break into the car, and then you peeled the thing off the steering column like the old-fashioned way. Then you stuck a USB key into the place where you turn the key. In the 70s, you stuck a screwdriver.
Yes.
Not any different, right? And Hyundai and Kia are also not the only automakers who have this issue. There are other automakers that have the issue. Not a big deal. What precipitated all this is YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and TikTok, because those videos are rampant out there. And I looked at maybe 6 or 7. This is just like, the last time I checked was about 30 days ago. There are all sorts of videos out there explaining how to do it. Step-by-step instructions on how to steal these cars. It's ridiculous.
Right.
So it's like, it does come back to we mentioned 230 before, even though it wasn't part of the Supreme Court judgment. But this is like, it's a free-for-all, right? You can basically the only laws are about child trafficking and prostitution. Everything else is like free game pretty much. And so these TikTok videos, I mean, not to defend, Hyundai and Kia, they definitely had a security issue, but they'd already been offering software upgrades, and the other cars can't physically do it. So you need to put one of those bars from the bad old 80s.
The club.
You put the club on it. So you have to do, that's what you have to do on a few of these cars. But there are other cars out there that are just as easy to break into in a way. But so it's just it was this 2 issues. One was, should you have step-by-step burglary instructions on TikTok and YouTube? I mean, it's still on YouTube. You can find these right now. Go out on YouTube and you can find them. So should that be the case? I don't know. And I think to your point, the original one, the crime. So in Wisconsin, I think I talked to a government representative there, and they saw, when these TikTok videos started, they saw automobile thefts double in a year. Double. I mean, it was just, so that's why they were part of that lawsuit. They were like, come on, let's do something about this.
Yeah.
But they didn't sue YouTube. They didn't sue Google. They didn't sue. So I don't know.
So, Rob, what happens? Take us home on this. What happens when TikTok does a video on how to build a nuclear weapon?
Yeah.
Well, you can look up that in the library. I do wonder, JP, how much of the For You page on TikTok is now nothing but car theft? Now
I mean,
you're interested in that subject.
It's like when you write about it, I try to be careful about it, and some places will, not let me say specific details about something, even in describing, a news story, because we don't want to encourage people to do this.
Right.
But apparently, well, as we know, Twitter and YouTube, whatever, maybe it doesn't really matter.
Yes. So, Rob, take us home. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, if to the younger folks watching this, if you're looking for something fun to do on TikTok, check out Book Talk or Cooking Talk, and instead of like trying to find ways to do something that is a crime and that can land you in jail.
Right.
Well, and the TikTok thing, and again, this was not, I think that's a relevant point. There's lots of crazy crap that goes on in TikTok. I mean, stealing a car, obviously, is it still a felony? I guess it's a felony. Well, not today. Who knows if it's a felony?
Pretty sure it's still a felony.
Anyway, I would think it's a felony.
Unless the used car is worth as little as perhaps the 17-year-old one in my driveway.
Yeah, but the point I'm making, there's a lot of other crazy TikTok challenges go on, some kind of goofy, but other stuff that could kill you, that could be dangerous in some of the things that the youngsters of our audience likes to watch, which is, I know I have a huge young audience on this.
Really crushing it with Gen Z, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
It's really a problem. I mean, it truly was a problem. It has been, because I was in Scottsdale a few months ago, and I went through the parking lot in a park to go for a run. And when I came back, this Kia car that was parked there, the window was broken. Somebody had tried to break in, and there was a park ranger trying to figure out what was going on. They didn't take the car, but they tried in, 20 minutes. So yeah, crazy.
Scary stuff. Well, guys, listen, thanks for taking the time to join me for today's podcast. For our viewing and listening audience, please make sure the Smart Tech Check podcast is part of your day or commute. Please make sure that you hit the like and subscribe buttons at the end of today's podcast, or use these on-screen QR codes to connect with me. You can also follow me on Twitter at Mark Vina Tech Guy. And until next time, have a great week. And thanks, guys, for participating.